bring back the proof of their courage. Thanks, Dragon. Survival can be a matter of luck or skill, and you can't rely on luck. Listen to my story. This may be our last chance. What is up, button mashers, min-maxers, speedrunners, and rage quitters? I am Bibo. Welcome to Unblockable. I am super excited for today's episode as our topic is something that is near and dear to my heart, and I'm pretty sure the same can be said for many gamers across different generations. I'm speaking, of course, of the Final Fantasy franchise, which many will agree is the towering juggernaut of the single-player Japanese role-playing game or JRPG genre. Perhaps even more so here in our neck of the woods, as JRPGs understandably tend to feature an anime aesthetic, and we all know how popular that genre of animation is here in our country. Although Final Fantasy as a series does tend to mix it up more when it comes to style and design choices compared to other JRPGs such as Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest, or the Persona series. To the uninitiated, Final Fantasy may come off as an odd use of alliteration for a title of anything, especially a series that continues to this day, but stories abound, painting the original game released in 1987 as a final last-ditch effort at success. Whether that went for developer Squaresoft itself or director Hideo Kojima's career as a game designer remains unclear, but one thing is, it worked. Final Fantasy is one of the highest grossing video game properties of all time, boasting a lifetime gross of $10.9 billion as of last year. As I hope you are aware by now, here at Unblockable, we compare and contrast two subjects of the same ilk, and today those come in the forms of Final Fantasy VII, specifically through the lens of the recent Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy X, two absolutely beloved entries in the series. Critical acclaim, record-breaking sales, icons of their console generations, those being the PlayStations 1 and 2, the latter of which is the best-selling video game console of all time. What else can you say? Both feature lovable characters, epic stories, and gameplay that takes you on a grand adventure. And today, we are seeing which adventure you should go on if you've never been on one. Final Fantasy is one of the most important video game franchises for a lot of people. It's basically an icon of the video game industry. I personally grew up on Final Fantasy. When I was a kid, I used to watch my dad play FF VI, FF VII, FF VIII, and then until I started getting into it myself and just falling in love with Final Fantasy, which I just realized I take for granted how ingrained it is in gaming culture, because a lot of people don't understand that they are numbered. Like there's Final Fantasy 1 to 15 at this point, but you don't have to have played every single one, things like that. But here to help me explain it better are two very awesome guests coming back. So my first guest, she is back. You've seen a lot of her at this point. She is my partner in crime. She is a model, a cosplayer, a game content creator, and also an English teacher. Welcome back to the show, Sillykonpeito.
What's up? Hey, I'm back.
Hello, you are back. Thank you so much for joining us again to talk about a game that I'm sure is very near and dear to our hearts. I'm sure it's also important for you and means a lot. You were talking about the 10th Final Fantasy this week, Final Fantasy X. Real quick, what can you tell us about your relationship with FF X?
Well, with FF X, it's a bit more, I guess in a sense, it's a bit more refreshing because the main character is much more upbeat and carefree compared to like some of the previous Final Fantasy series.
Right, he's actually pretty different from a lot of the brooding, like dark protagonists that we see in these games, which is, I didn't realize it's kind of more that's the exception rather than the norm. Okay, thank you so much, SK. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on FF X and Final Fantasy as a whole, really. Our other guest, he is back. He is a YouTuber, a vlogger, a fisherman, which still blows my mind, and I have more fishing questions for him today since we're talking about Final Fantasy, and he also used to be a registered nurse. welcome back, Gloco.
Yo, what's up, guys? It's me. I'm back. I have Cactor with
What
me.
is up,
'Cause why
man?
not?
So, wait, you used to be a registered nurse, which means you are a nurse no
yeah.
longer. What happened there? Like, what? I'm sure a lot of years and time went into being registered, getting registered as a nurse, and so what? How did things change for you?
Actually, a little lore about me. So right after I graduated, right after I passed the boards, you guys know like that excuse like a lot of fresh graduates say that papahinga muna ako for 1 year. I'm gonna take a break for 1 year. So that break that I did was YouTubing. So making content and all that. So I just wanted to stay away from the toxic environment of the hospital here in the Philippines, and just sit back and see where YouTubing goes. Like I wasn't really expecting to be successful with it. I just wanted to do something else. Like I want to do this now because if it's now or never, whether it fails or not, at least
Right.
I can say to myself that I tried it. But fortunately, it all worked out. So there you go. And
Oh, that is awesome. That
Yeah.
has clearly paid off for you.
and also a little tidbit. I also during my 1 year as a YouTuber, I also did English teaching online with Japanese students. So that was like my side job to earn money because like I wasn't really earning anything during my first year in YouTube. So yeah, I kind of relate to COOLDOWN. Yeah.
SK, you mentioned in our episode a couple weeks back that you do teach non-English speakers as well. Are any of them Japanese speakers?
Actually, no. Some of them were East Asian.
Okay.
Yeah, so mostly Chinese,
So-
Korean, and actually Indian.
That's cool. Awesome. All right, so Gloco is here to talk about FF VII, Final Fantasy VII, although he hasn't played the original FF VII, and neither have I, so he's going to talk about it through the lens of the recent Final Fantasy VII Remake, which we realize isn't the entirety of the original game story, but it's the same characters. It's Final Fantasy VII for a new generation, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be an engaging discussion nonetheless. Final Fantasy features a vast amount and dearth of lore, right? It's steeped in lore, and something that I didn't realize actually some people who may not be familiar with it don't understand is that yes, it's a numbered series. You got Final Fantasy 1 to at this point it's Final Fantasy 15, but you don't have to have played the previous Final Fantasies to get into a new one. You can literally play your very first Final Fantasy can be 15. With that said, there are threads that link Final Fantasy games together, right? You got your Moogles, you got your Marlboros and your Cactuars, as I see Gloco has behind him right now. So there are like common themes, common characters, common names, common spells, weapons, monsters, all sorts of things, but all set in different universes and settings per entry, right? So let's start with SK. FF10, how was it a refreshing Final Fantasy while still staying loyal to and true to the essence of what FF is? Because even if FF10 was the best RPG of all time, if no one saw a Moogle or a Marlboro in it, or maybe a plushie of a Moogle or a Marlboro in it, people would have been up in arms, right? So how did it differentiate itself while staying loyal to what Final Fantasy is?
I guess in a sense it still stays true to the main essence of the Final Fantasy series. It's just that you have new characters, you have new teammates, you also have new love interests, and at the same time you also have like a new main character to follow. So unlike like I said earlier, unlike the previous main characters of the Final Fantasy series, you have here Tidus, who is much more optimistic, much more much more friendly. It feels more like a refreshing character because let's face it, if throughout the entire Final Fantasy series everyone is the same broody type of character, by the 10th part of the game you'll probably feel like, oh, this character is another one of those broody types, and
Yeah.
it's gonna get tiring. So at least he's like a breath of fresh air, and while we discover more and more about who he really is, so he's not all just fun and games, but there's also a serious side to this main character. So, um, as we discover more about who he is throughout the entire series, you get to slowly feel yourself getting attached to all of the characters, which I think is also one of the, I guess, not necessarily key points, but like charm points of the Final Fantasy series. Like as the story progresses, you feel yourself getting attached to like the main characters, the side characters, and everyone in the story, and it feels like you're actually part of the story itself.
It's funny you mentioned the brooding main characters in FF. I guarantee that Squall Leonhardt ruined a lot of young gamers' romantic lives because he made you believe that you could just be quiet, not say anything, but still get the girl. It doesn't make sense. That's not how life works, Squall. Get with it, dude. All right, let's go to Gloco. FF7. FF7, this is the big one, right? This is the Final Fantasy for a lot of people, even though honestly, like the real fans say that FF6 is the best one, but I digress. FF7 is like it's the one that means the most to a lot of people. I think it's safe to say that. And with that, it's still, again, it maintains that Final Fantasy charm, like SK mentioned, that Final Fantasy tradition, I guess is the best word to describe it. Final Fantasy is a franchise steeped in tradition. But Final Fantasy VII is a little, FF10 is still a little more fantasy oriented, right? It's got a bit of sci-fi in there, but it's with the character designs, character description, the character worlds, the worlds. It's very much a fantasy looking Final Fantasy, if that's not too redundant. But FF7 is kind of set in a steampunk world. It's more sci-fi than it is traditional fantasy, and yet it managed to maintain that tradition. So what can you say about how FF7 is still a Final Fantasy despite it sort of bucking the trend when it came out?
Okay, so FF7 Remake. Just to give you guys a context of my knowledge with Final Fantasy, the only Final Fantasy I've ever experienced was a bit of FF6, FF8 to its fullest, and FF9 to its fullest, and then FF15. FF8 and FF9, I totally backseated that. Like, I watched my brother play those games. That's why I got introduced to Final Fantasy. Actually, Final Fantasy is like my first ever RPG, JRPG ever. And up till now, it's still my favorite. It's like my most beloved game that actually got me into doing YouTube, backseat gaming. So I'm trying to give my viewers the same type of experience. So it's Final Fantasy is like one of those games that anyone can enjoy, whether you're playing it or just watching someone play it. The story just really immerses you as long as you're paying attention to it. So when it comes to Final Fantasy VII, though, I haven't really touched the original. I have never played the original. However, from my experience with the previous Final Fantasies, FF7 Remake was super engaging. Like, you still have the summons, of course. They call it, I don't know, they come from materia. The system is pretty unique. The materia system, ATB system. I think ATB system was something that FF7, correct me if I'm wrong, FF7 started. I think they were the ones who pioneered that. Or I'm not really sure. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm pretty sure it was in 6.
In 6,
as far as but I will jump off of what we're saying in that I think it's a lot of people's favorite ATB system.
Yeah, okay.
If being honest, yeah.
So the ATB system of FF7 was pretty iconic, and FF7 in general is the most beloved Final Fantasy, not just by the fans but even Square themselves. Like, it has how many movies? How many anime series? How many spin-offs? Spin-off games? It's the most beloved Final Fantasy. Like, if a lot of people even would probably say that it could be the best, or at least it's the most beloved. Or someone like me who hasn't really experienced the OG FF7, I was so hyped for FF7 Remake. Because finally, finally, this is my chance to get into the community of FF7. This is my chance to finally immerse myself in the actual lore of the game. Because the first time I got exposed to FF7 was not actually because of the game, but because back when my brother was in high school, he invited a couple of friends, and they popped up a DVD of FF7 Advent Children, and then I was like, wow, that movie looks so good. But everyone looks so great, the CGI and everything. And then I don't really know what was going on, but it was interesting as heck. So so when FF7 Remake was announced, I was so hyped. Finally, I can get into the game. But lo and behold, when I played the game, it's actually quite different from the OG in many ways, in more ways than one. So we might get into that later on, because spoilers. But yeah, the elements are still there. You got the classic Firaga, Curaga, and all that.
Yep.
You got the summons. What do you call this? You got the oversized weapons and all that, ATB system, all the works and everything. As a Final Fantasy VII should, as a Final Fantasy game should have.
People who aren't too familiar with FF, give them a bit more insight into what it is. It's Final Fantasy, a JRPG, so you essentially, for the most part, control a party of unique characters, and it's an RPG. So there's a leveling system. You gain experience points by doing things, but Final Fantasy is a linear RPG, right? So I mentioned earlier that it's not just character names, spells like Gloco mentioned, or creatures that Final Fantasy share, even though they're not all set in the same world. It's also themes. And if you've played more than one Final Fantasy, you'll be able to notice the common threads they have when it comes to the stories and their themes. Like, you got the start where you meet your main character, and then you meet the first party member, and then you go on a journey, and then you beat the boss, and then you meet the main bad guy. Do you trust him or do you not? And then there's another boss, and then there's a part where everyone's sad, and then maybe someone dies, and then you get an airship, and then you can explore the world, and then you get stronger, and then all sorts of things happens, and the empire and the kingdom and everything, all of that. Final Fantasies kind of share all of those across the board. Main point, people love Final Fantasy because of its story and its characters. So let's start with SK. FF10 is such a rich story. Real quickly, can you give us a glimpse into its story and its characters?
So real quick, it's kind of like inspired by Southeast Asia, given the area itself, like the map and the architecture of the buildings and everything, and at the same time their costumes or their outfits. So when it comes to the game, I don't want to spoil too much, but most of the central theme is based around Gnosticism, wherein everything has a material existence, including the body, and that the material world was created by an evil god, but eventually, things kind of like sort itself out. So it highlights belief in that religion is man-made, or at least it's a cultivated concept. So the thing with a lot of Final Fantasy games is that there is always this main theme in the story that's trying to tell you something, and then when you finish the game, you're like, oh wow, so that's what this all means. So it's not just a game wherein you go through the story, you play it, and then done. But it also has like major themes, major things that it wants to tell you, or at least it wants to teach you. Yeah. And when it comes to like the characters, so you have a lot of different characters or party members, like Lulu and Yuna and Riku, who is like one of I guess the more iconic characters in Final Fantasy X. Like I do recall a lot of my friends cosplay Riku. I think she's like their best girl or something.
Yeah. Riku's best girl for a lot of people. Okay, so that's your main premise and setting for Final Fantasy X. Thank you so much, SK. Gloco, what's the story and who are the characters of Final Fantasy VII? Why has it been so beloved and iconic so much that there is a remake of it out now?
Okay, so from the get-go, FF7 Remake, you start off like with a setting called Midgar. Okay, it's a city, it's a utopian city within the middle of nowhere or in the middle of a wasteland. Okay, it's like the final frontier in some ways. The world is set in, they call it the planet or Gaia. And it's pretty much post-apocalyptic. Like, everything's so barren now, and Midgar is being controlled by the Shinra Corporation. So the setting is more, unlike other Final Fantasies. This one, like what you said a while ago, it's more industrial. Okay, more steampunkish. So that's the best way I can describe it. It's more industrialized. Even the music has like clashing of metal and iron in it, incorporated in it, just to let you guys feel that.
There are corporations in it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's it. The thing, the I think the main thing that kind of appeals to a lot of people here in FF7 Remake is that there's a lot of political involvement in it. Right in the get-go, you're introduced as some kind of mercenary for an environmental activist group called the Avalanche, and you're trying to overthrow a corporation that's capitalizing on the life force of the planet. So the story really revolves on what do you call this? Cloud Strife. He's the mercenary, and actually he has another backstory, but right now he's just a mercenary in the get-go. And you're helping out the environmental activists of the Avalanche, and then you're trying to you're basically terrorists. Okay, you don't mind killing people because of the explosions and stuff. You don't mind doing well, not really they don't mind, but it's like a necessary evil to overthrow this corrupt corporation. So that's there's a lot of themes in the game where it kind of is reminiscent of like real world social issues, especially in some countries. Like maybe some parts of it is reminiscent of like Philippine political problems, and maybe some other stuff in Japan. So I think that's where it really hits home for a lot of people. You see, Midgar is pretty much like set in a way that there are levels. So the upper levels, definitely that's where all the top people are. That's where the Shinra employees live. That's where all the good stuff are. That's where all the privileged people live. And then you have like the bottom plate where all the crap happens. It's the ghetto. It's the squatters area. That's where all the poor people live. Okay, the street rats and all that. So there's like a what do you call this, an economical hierarchy of some sorts in the game, and the game actually highlights those social issues, and I think that's why people why this game totally appeals to a lot of people, especially even the newer generation where activism is very very rampant, and people are more involved now politically because of social media. It's a sort of things that I mean, I think this remake just came in at the right time. You know, like back then when we were kids, they weren't really paying attention to that. But now that it's hitting them back, it's like, wow, this game actually made a lot of sense. It's kind of like when you play Metal Gear Solid. Back then, you were just playing it for the action and stuff. But once you pay attention to the details, like everything that Kojima, all the small little details there, then you find out that hey, these games are actually, calling out like real social world issues. So that's pretty cool for me.
That's a cool thing to point out, especially considering like I think it's safe to say all three of us kind of grew up with Final Fantasy, and as you grow up, you end up like perceiving the same game in a different way because your perspective on the world is different, and because the stories of Final Fantasy are so sprawling and so epic, really is the best. I can't think of a better term to describe these games. They just tackle so many themes that relate to the real world in a way that you don't always realize your first time through. I have to apologize to both of you. I realize I asked you to summarize Final Fantasy games quickly when it's pretty hard to do that because they're pretty long games.
I'm sorry. It is.
You spend upwards of 70 to 100 hours playing these games, but I think you guys did really admirable jobs. But also in highlighting the contrast between these two games that share the same name. So FF10 and FF7, so distinct so singular in their identities as video games, as narratives, as forms of media and art, but they share a name, and because of that, they share tradition, and they share a common DNA, which is great. So thank you guys for those perspectives. What else can you tell me about FF? There's so much to talk about. Like, well, Gloco, who's your favorite Final Fantasy VII character? Everyone has a favorite. It says a lot about how enduring these characters, and that they're so memeable. You'll find a lot of Final Fantasy memes out there because, oh, this character would act this way. Squall would eat curry like this, or Barrett would do this in this situation. Who's your favorite?
So my favorite in FF7 has got to be Jessie. Okay, Jessie is a member, the female member of Avalanche, okay, of your main party. And I think there's kind of a bit of bias of me towards her because of her voice actress. Like I'm one of those type of people who like simps for voice actresses.
Right.
And
who's Jessie's voice actress?
The voice actress of Jessie is the same, Lindell, I forgot her first name, oh my god. But same voice actress as Futaba from Persona 5.
Oh, okay.
In the, what do you call it, the English voice actress. So, Persona 5 is like one of my favorite JRPGs, and Futaba was my favorite there as well. So, like, hearing her voice again through Jessie, and then they actually have like the same kind of playful attitude. So I just pretty much she's like the, what do you call this, it's the total opposite of Cloud Strife. Like Cloud Strife is like cold and what do you call this, and he acts like an arrogant little dude. But
just
then again we have
alone.
here
Strife.
Cloud Strife. So he's like a little cocky little dude. And then we have here Jessie, who's trying to break that ice, you know, she's trying to break it. So she's being compared with Aerith in some ways, but for me, Jessie is a lot cooler. She has more street smarts and in all of that, so I like her.
One of my favorite commentaries about Jessie in FF VII Remake is that they took, it was Donkey who mentioned it on YouTube. I'm sure you're familiar with him. They took FF VII's love triangle and turned it into a love rectangle because there's this new character named Jessie and she likes you too. Blah blah.
Yeah.
I haven't finished FF VII Remake, but I did like what they were doing with Jessie, to be honest. Because they took her, Biggs, and Wedge, and these are the Biggs and Wedge are probably the most fleshed out Biggs and Wedges in any Final Fantasy. Star Wars fans clearly know where their naming gets its inspiration from, but yeah, Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge, they play a big part in FF VII Remake, right?
And contrary to like the OG FF7, because I did a bit of research, like after I finished FF7 Remake, I did like a compare and contrast of like the scenes and stuff, and it turns out like the Avalanche members didn't really have too much of a presence in FF7. Like they're there, you talk to them and all that, but then something happened and then that's it. But here in FF7, like you actually form a deeper bond with them. They actually have their personalities are, like what you said, more fleshed out now. There's actual backstories with them. You know more about them. You actually spend more time with them than the other characters, and you can't really help but get attached to them. So yeah, warning about that. Attached to these characters. Just a fair warning for those. Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything else there. And that's why after I researched more about it, the more I appreciated what this Final Fantasy VII Remake was all about.
We share the same favorite character. My favorite is Jessie as well. I know she gets a lot of flack sometimes, but I don't know. People are gonna hate me for this, but my only real experience of Aerith is from the remake. And there's something about the way they just made her talk and do things in the game where it's like, oh, look at me, I'm the quirky cute girl and I'm gonna pick flowers now. And oh no, don't step on the flowers. Here, have a flower. I'm like, I get it, she's quirky, but I want to bash my head against concrete every time she opens her mouth. I'm sorry. I know people are gonna hate me for that because she is best girl of the Final Fantasy franchise for a lot of people. But to me, just the way she was portrayed in the remake was like too manic pixie for my tastes.
Actually, like before I played FF7 remake, that's my only exposure was FF7 Advent Children, right? And some memes, and then I never really saw Aerith do anything else other than the memes and the Advent Children Aerith, and she was portrayed there as like some kind of like that girl next door that's so timid and all that, like some kind of like religious person. Yeah, like something that you would expect a nun would be. And then I got introduced to her in FF7 remake, and I was like, wait, what? Why is she so noisy? Why is she so annoying? This is not the Aerith I pictured. So
Okay, all right.
all expectations were shattered after that. But
we should. I appreciate that, but we should probably stop trashing on everyone's favorite favorite girl before they stop watching the episode. Okay, SK, who is your favorite FF10 character?
Okay, for FF10, my favorite character is actually Lulu. I have this.
You know what?
Yeah.
Sorry, I guessed as much when she was the first character you mentioned before the main character, before Yuna, who's the pilgrimage we're all on. It's Lulu, and I could tell it. Lulu's her favorite.
I like Lulu too. I've never played FF10, but I like Lulu. I've seen her aesthetics.
Yeah.
The aesthetics are nice. Well, at the same time, I don't know. I have this penchant for characters that look like they seem like they're misunderstood. Yeah, like they seem like they're the bad guys, but in reality they're like they have a sensitive, soft side to them too.
You know what? I think Lulu might have been my favorite as well. No, wait, well, there's Kimari, who's basically a blue Chewbacca, but as far as just the main thing that I love about Lulu is her weapon. Because for those who don't know, like Final Fantasy characters traditionally have a weapon each, right? You have the character who uses a sword, the character who is a magician, the character who's a summoner sometimes, the character who uses a spear, blah, blah, blah. Lulu's weapon is...
Dolls.
A doll. She uses a doll.
Yeah.
Like, it's the best. That's my favorite weapon because she's just like makes it go like a Pokemon and hit the enemy.
The contrast is so it is like, well, it's not jarring, but there's like this huge contrast because she looks like her style, like the way she looks based on her makeup and like her outfit and everything is very dark, and then she throws a doll and like there's a disconnect somewhere.
The contrast. They call that gap moe. They call that gap moe, right?
Oh, there you go.
Though can I say something about FF7 though? I still
yes,
think,
please.
Yeah, I still think Cloud is my best boy throughout the entire series.
Oh, really? Okay.
Say sorry to the Zack fans.
like there's something about Cloud that just, it feels so charming.
Yeah, the characters are great. Just so I just want to get this in there. My favorite is FF9, and Zidane is it for me. FF10 and 7 are kind of important in another way to me in my view, because FF7 was the first Final Fantasy on PlayStation 1, FF10 was the first Final Fantasy on PlayStation 2, and they both kind of signaled really big changes for the series. FF7 was the very first 3D Final Fantasy, and FF10 was the first main Final Fantasy, as far as I'm aware, that featured voice acting. In my opinion, the charm of those early Final Fantasies, and even the original 7, is that there was no voice acting. So Final Fantasies, the early ones at least, harnessed something that is super powerful in my opinion, and that's the audience's imagination. What can you tell me about that shift that the series has made? Because I still love the newer Final Fantasies, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I mentioned in our Ragnarok episode, there's something about sprites that I find so charming. And even though I've never finished it, whenever I try to play or load up Final Fantasy VI, because it's rendered in such a stylized but simple way, my imagination just gets engaged so much more when I play a 2D top-down Final Fantasy as compared to the newer 3D ones with full voice acting and full production value. What do you guys think?
For that one, I think it's more of, one, it's the the production company's way of like showcasing the improvement of their like equipments and everything, like the production changes through time. I do recall watching something on Netflix about how they went through the changes of gaming in history, and how it started with sprites, and then eventually there's 3D modeling and all of those advances in technology. It's a way for the developers to showcase those advances in technology and how well they master it. But at the same time, I cannot deny that there is an imagination factor when it comes to the sprites, because they're just so small and there's not a lot of details, so it leaves the details to the player's imagination. So you can like imagine how handsome or how pretty this character would look, despite their sprite being like that small. The place or the setting itself, since it's also not really fully rendered graphics, you get to imagine, oh, this is probably what the trees would look like there, or this is probably how this entire city would look like, as compared to now, wherein they already mapped it out for you, and all you have to do is to appreciate it with your eyes.
Right. What about you, Gloco? How do you feel about that clear contrast and clear distinction in the lineage of the Final Fantasy franchise?
Actually, that's something that I'm very, very thankful for. Like what you mentioned, imagination was something that was that is so underrated right now. But it's something that really got me going back when I was a kid. So the thing about the previous Final Fantasy, like what you guys said, we're just looking at sprites. But like if you think about it back then, those were like the best looking graphics during that generation. Like wow, this is so realistic. Like you look at Squall's face and like you have like Spike here. That is so realistic. Wow. And if I think about it right now, man, the PS1 was really good to be able to pull off those graphics and stuff. However, there's a reason why my ultimate favorite Final Fantasy is still FF VIII and FF IX. It's because of how classic it is. The reading of the text, how dependent each scene is with the music. That's why I really, really love Nobuo Uematsu. That's why I'm actually more inclined to classical music, because video game music was like that. It's orchestrated in some way. And also, here's something that I've noticed just recently. When I talk to people who has never played a JRPG, like people who played Dota only, people who played like the other casual games and all that, people who are not exposed to JRPG, reading text and imagining things, when I ask them, hey, may naririnig ka bang boses sa utak mo? Like, do you hear voices in your head when you're reading stuff or when you're imagining something? And they're saying, no, never. And I'm that's so weird for me.
I know,
because all this time when I was a kid, like when Zidane talks and when Cloud talks, Rinoa talks, like I have a certain voice given to them. When I'm reading manga, there's always a voice. And then I meet people who don't even hear what, who can't even put an imaginary voice towards characters. And at first I thought it was super weird, but there are actually people like that, and that's because they weren't exposed to certain mediums, that's why I'm very, very thankful for the Final Fantasy series, because of that. Like it really honed my imagination.
That's a good thing to emphasize, is that it just got you so lost in the world and imagining everything about the world beyond what the game even showed you, right? And I guess it's on Square to just be able to maintain that sort of charm and magic despite the graphical advantages of the day, which to some people might be a disadvantage, but to each his own, right? Before we go, and we save this for last to avoid spoiling anyone, but Final Fantasy is sort of like they're Final Fantasy fans, when they talk, a lot of them discuss like the big story twist moments in the journey, right? Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't played these games, but fair warning, we're gonna talk about some very key moments in the games. But real quick, before we go, give me like your favorite big twist moment or big revelation in your respective Final Fantasy game and how it affected you? Let's start with Gloco.
Okay, here's the thing. Remember when I said that I compared and contrast right after I played Remake?
I know where this is going. Okay.
So, yep. So like for someone who had no context at all with the OG FF7, after Remake, people in my chat and because I was streaming the whole thing, people in my chat was like, "Wait, what? What's happening?" And they were like the OG players, and I'm like, "Wait, what's happening? Wait, what do you mean?" Like, dude,
that's a really,
why is that person alive and all that?
Right.
Yeah, he's supposed to be, she, or whatever, is supposed to be dead. Dude, Zack's alive? What? Dude, time travel? Why is Sephiroth in the beginning and all that? And why is the theme of Advent Children playing? And then people are starting to, piece together a lot of different theories and all that. What the heck are those ghost things? Oh, they're arbiters of fate. Wait, those weren't there in the first game? What? So that's why I'm very thankful, in a way. Like, a lot of people are saying that, here's how Square Enix marketed FF7. Like, how is it gonna be different from the OG? And at the same time, how is it going to be the same? Because the issue here is, how are we gonna please the OG players, and how are we gonna attract newer ones? Okay, and just for me, like, that's the beauty of it. Like, even though I haven't played the OG one, I'm kind of thankful for that, because it's gonna be a fresh experience for me.
Yes.
I don't have expectations. I wouldn't react too strongly about changes. I won't have any biases. I'm just going at this blind, and I'm enjoying it and immersing myself with whatever is happening. So in a way, I'm just I'm riding along how Square Enix is reshaping this series in the future, which is something like I really, really appreciate.
Remake Nomura Final Fantasy VII.
Nomura.
Essentially Kingdom
Nomura.
Hearts it, and
Yes.
for those uninitiated, FF7 Remake is just the first few hours of the original FF7. But because it's a Final Fantasy, it has to be cosmic, and all of a sudden you're fighting Sephiroth in space, even though you're still in Midgar. So like, it's like just epic and gigantic. So basically that's how Final Fantasy VII twisted the twist. It's that there's a multiverse now, I guess, in Final Fantasy VII, to put it simply. All right, SK FF10. Xanarkand, Spira, how did it like affect you when the revelations of the game reared their head?
I guess the most jarring one is the last part. So of course I'm not gonna spoil it, because that's pretty much the entire the entire plot twist. But that major plot twist is like right in the feels. like literally as the scene was unfolding, it's like, oh, ouch.
All right, that's great. Well, you know what, guys, that was so much fun. Thank you so much. I can tell how much you guys love this franchise, and I would hazard to say that it probably influenced a lot of your like tastes growing up, as it did mine. I hope you enjoyed talking about these games as well. I really loved hearing your insights. It was great. This is such a beloved franchise, and I can tell that it means a lot to you, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on them. All right, that's it for our Final Fantasy X/Final Fantasy VII Remake episode. Thank you so much again, SK and Gloco. Please let our viewers know where they can find you and what you're up to right now. SK.
You guys can find me on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram. So right now I'm also trying to get a Twitch affiliate. So here's to hoping I finally finished the amount of hours needed to stream on Twitch so that I can become affiliate. So do drop by my Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/Sillykonpeito.
Nice. All right, Gloco.
Okay, you guys can find me in youtube.com/Gloco Gaming, and if you want to see like best friends play and do dumbass things in video games, you guys can check us out in youtube.com/Pinoy's Plays. So you can find me there, and also do like my Facebook page, fb.com/Gloco Gaming. Yeah.
Awesome. And once this pandemic is over, Gloco is gonna teach me how to actually fish with tackle and everything.
Let's go.
so that I don't have to be content with fishing in Final Fantasy 15. All right. Once again, before we let you go real quick, recommendation, one game that you're playing right now that is something we haven't talked about this episode. Have at it. What is on your list at the moment? SK.
Okay. Since we're talking about JRPGs, I'd actually second like Gloco's mention earlier in the earlier in the show, which is Persona 5. It's really good. Like y'all should try it out. In the realm of RPGs in general, or like you can or JRPG styles, you can also try Doki Doki Literature Club.
Okay.
That's awesome. Okay, Gloco.
Okay, I want to plug in something that Pinoy indie devs have made. It's called Love Esquire. It's highly successful in a lot of niche communities. And then, what else? Yeah, go play FF 15 for the fishing if you want. It's
Absolutely.
really good. Camping, fishing.
I concur.
Everything you guys want to do with your homies, you can do it in FF 15.
Yep.
Play that one. And
Sorry,
also
what's
Undertale.
the... Right, Undertale.
Yeah,
Undertale.
Undertale.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what was that? What's the title of that Pinoy developed game?
Oh, it's called Love Esquire. It's from by Yang Yang Mobile, and they're also
Awesome.
working on and they're also behind that other successful what do you call this visual novel game called I think it was called The Mansion, or oh my god, I forgot what it was called, but yeah, it's fully voice acted visual novel, and it's horror. But Love Esquire is more of like a wacky what do you call this, wacky dating otome game, and it's pretty cool. It has RPG elements. It's nice. Check them out.
Nice. We have come a long way from Anino. That was like the first big Filipino developed game, if anyone remembers. All right, you know what? Real quick, because we're talking about JRPGs, I want to give a recommendation, and I would love it if you guys know, if the two of you have actually played this as well. It was released on the Game Boy Advance. It means so much to me. It's called Golden Sun. If you haven't played that, that is a beautiful, beautiful JRPG. Golden Sun. All right, thank you guys so much. SK, Gloco, appreciate it. See you around. Have fun playing those games. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
All right, thank you so much, SK and Gloco. We clearly talked way too much about Final Fantasy, but it just goes to show you how influential the series is once again, and how much it means to gamers, to put it simply. If someone were to jump in, though, as we've discussed, you don't need to play all the previous Final Fantasies to play the latest one. But if you were to choose, if it came down to, since we discussed the Final Fantasy VII remake as opposed to the original itself, or Final Fantasy X, I played Final Fantasy VII Remake without having played the original. I don't really know the story. I never got around to it. I tried so many times through the years, but just never got around to finishing it or investing too much time in it. So I tried playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I haven't finished still, but I did go ahead and spoil myself for the story of the game. And what we all thought would be a newcomer-friendly experience for people who've never played the original Final Fantasy VII is anything but. It is definitely for fans of Final Fantasy VII. I will say that straight up without spoiling anything. So if you were to play Final Fantasy for the first time, I do recommend Final Fantasy X. It is a particular taste, I will admit. If you are a fan of the fantasy genre in general, this will be a bit off the beaten path for you, because like SK mentioned, it's a very decided East Asian aesthetic that permeates that game, and it's not really, it's anything but your traditional fantasy anything. It's something that it remains popular to this day, and I do feel like that would be a very good introduction to Final Fantasy, despite by our I mean Final Fantasy fans, our love for it being cultivated through the earlier games where there was no voice acting. The graphics were beautiful but of their time, and to many that still remains the essence of the series. Nonetheless, I do feel like 10 is a great gateway towards maybe discovering those older Final Fantasies where the voice acting wasn't there and everything was rendered in a very specific way, be it in 2D or static 3D. Regardless, 10 is a fantastic gateway, and it's no surprise that it's the first Final Fantasy for the PlayStation 2, which was such a popular console. Everyone basically had it, and a lot of people are familiar with FF10. It has been deemed the most popular FF. I know that that's an object of debate for a lot of people, but I think 10, once again, is the best one to start with if you've never played Final Fantasy before. Alright, please join us next week, Wednesday, December 9, as we meet a cheerful Italian plumber and a wild bandicoot, not making crazy jumps across broad chasms, but on the racetrack with our special guests, Sillykonpeito and Sketchy Jerry.